Ya Ali Madad, and welcome everyone. Today is November 3rd, 2020, and it's 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And our topic today is entitled The Pyramid of Faith, Journey from Shariat to Marifat. Now, this is part one of a four-part lecture series. In Islam, faith has many levels of participation, transformation, and realization. In this four-part series, Dr. HASSAM will define the four fundamental levels, namely Shariat, Tariqat, Haqiqat, and Marifat, and he will explain the relationship amongst them. Understanding these levels and their interconnectedness allows the believer to gain clarity and to make progress on their journey towards Marifat. So we'll begin with a Ghanan recitation, and I'm very pleased to welcome Tabassum Chagani today. Tabassum, welcome, and thank you for being here. Please do begin whenever you're ready.
Yes, yeah.
Malali Madad.
I'm going to be reciting Chogaryo by Pir Sadruddin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bhai tini veere ju medu asu poniyo jiyo jiyo je mana chindeyo yara ghara rikiyana jeva dayo juga me jiyo mero te priyan san yara vindiyo sogna namo Virama na jiyo manmala yo bhiran yara jani shajavi rahe kanda shahapa rane jiyo parare trimbova rarai yara mata koi aeti sadina virata mujiyo muta sayana so yara phula suga daso chandavane virala dijiyo la diraha bhammar shakevi no ve pirago lya jiyo bolya pi rasadaradi sache shajadi dari se juga juga jasa mo mane ke jini ladaro hi bhe. I will recite the English translation now. Only for the verses that I have recited, because this is a long Chogaryu, so I've just selected a few verses. Oh, brother, the hopes and desires of all those moments which they cherished in their hearts were fulfilled. Oh, friends, the homes of the moments are filled with felicitations and happiness, because they have joined the ranks of the 33 crores of the saved ones. O friend, go and attend the gathering of knowledge and wisdom. O dear, do not have doubts in your mind. O friend, when the Lord of the three worlds, heavens, earth, and the undersurfaces, will wed, all members of the marriage party will gather. O friend, on the day of judgment, nobody should say that I did not hear properly. O friend, the clean-minded appreciates the fragrance of flower. O dear one, the bumblebee has found the path to enjoy the fragrance. O friend, through the blessings of the Master, pray to the Lord. The guide has said this. Peer Sadruddin has said this. Bravo to those moments who have found the secret inner mysteries. They are the ones who are the real recipients of the vision Didari through ages. Jamaat ke hai zinda.
Kayam Paya. Thank you, Tabassum. So
Shukran,
nice to see you.
alhamdulillah.
All right, everyone. Let's start our journey from Shariat to Marifat as we discover the pyramid of faith together. So please sit back if you can, relax, and enjoy today's session. Dr. Hassam, if you would, please.
Yeah, Limadat.
Walali Madad.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Faiza, for giving a kickstart to tonight's session, and to Nusri, you too being there. And and I know there are other co-hosts somewhere in the horizon behind the scene doing their marvelous work. And welcome to everyone this evening from whichever part of the world that you are in. And I hope this four-part lecture will be an opportunity for us to recognize, most of all, how very fortunate we are being the murid of Hazrat Imam, and why in the history of Islam in particular, we have an interpretation which allows us to practice our faith of Islam in the modern world, and not only from the material point of view, but eventually understanding the higher dimension, meaning the spiritual dimension of our practices. So let me tell you at the outset, why is it that this four-part lecture is in a way foundational? Because there is a huge, and I'm sure those of you who know, there is a huge body of writings and literature on these various dimensions of the Shariat, the Tariqat, the Hakikat, and the Marifat. And the purpose for which I am presenting this 4-part lecture is, first of all, to identify a very specific aspect of our practices, meaning that when we speak about these various stages or various levels or various dimensions, my focus and my desire, Mawla willing, inshallah, in this lecture is to be able to provide you a framework, if you like, so that the individual practicing the faith can relate at what level they are identifying their ilm, their knowledge. And identification of this knowledge is very important because sometimes there is the inadvertent mixture or crossing over, and which leads to misunderstanding, where people basically then confuse the Shariat with the Tariqat with the Hakikat, and the Hakikat with the Marifat. And when people get confused, they are not aligned with the practice, and then people end up thinking, oh, well, this is right, and this is wrong, and this is not the way it should be, and things like that. So I hope and pray Mawla gives me the inspiration and the courage that I'm able to present to you a framework so you, the listener, can decide where do you see your knowledge fitting in. And I want to tell you from the beginning, this is not designed to pass any kind of judgment or conclusion to say that this level is right, that level is wrong, and so on. Not at all. This is intended for the basis of clarification and understanding where people are at different level of their understanding and participation. As a result, various specific levels are designed to give people a specific transformation and a specific experience. So that being the case, and Islam being what it is, an all-encompassing faith, a faith whereby Maulana Bapa tells us, where all souls come from one source of origin. And this whole idea of the Ummah in Islam, the whole idea about the Muslim community being together as one Ummah is very important, not only from a philosophical point of view, but it is important for every Muslim everywhere in the world to know that there is diversity in Islam, as Maulana Bapa has explained to us, but at the same time, Maulana Bapa has clarified to us, this diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And if there is diversity, that means there is diversity. And we must learn to respect what this diversity is by understanding, by acknowledging, by integrating. And it does not mean that everybody needs to give up the interpretation they follow. What it does mean is to respect the interpretation by understanding, by knowledge. So let us begin. And as I begin, I'd like to acknowledge Tabassum for this Chogariya. And Chogariyas are a very special type of recitations in our Tariqah. And those of you who know something about it, there are Chogariyas that are recited in the morning time for the morning prayer, and there are Chogariyas that are recited in the evening. And you know, these chogariyas, historically, they were recited on a Thursday. And these chogariyas that were recited on a Thursday had a specific meaning. Now, as Tabassum said, it's a long, the one she recited is a long one, and there are different chogariyas, but I'm just giving you some general information. So why the Thursday? Well, our holy Pir, Pir Saduddin sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Pir Saduddin in particular, has demonstrated to us through these chogariyas that there will come a time in the future on a Thursday, and the time, the place, the date, and the occasion are all very specifically identified, but it's going to be a Thursday, and it's going to be this 4 gharis. You know that a ghari is 22.5 minutes. So 4 times is an hour and a half. And these chogaris, these 4 gharis, is the time given that before sunset at that particular day, there will be an event known as the Zahurat of the Holy Imam. And when that Zahurat takes place, it's going to be a Thursday. That's why, to remind the believers forever, Thursday is going to be that day. Now, I don't want to go into the details of the dates and all the other components for good reason, because that is not what I want you to focus on right now, but simply to say, chogariyas this is one example that our holy peers are giving about the prediction of the future. And there are so many ginans that it will amaze you to know how the holy peers have predicted these future events. And one ginan by Sayyid Imam Shah, known as Jhankar, is very descriptive of many such events that are to happen. And just from societal and scientific point of view, so many beautiful things are mentioned as to what is going to happen to a society that is fully scientific, but where there is no hand of God. And the turmoil that happens in a society like that is very well described by the Sayyids and our peers in the Ginan. Now, so that is something to bear in mind, and inshallah, Mawla willing, in the future, we may take up this idea of exploring and extrapolating from the Ginans what are our holy peers saying to us about societal development, talking to us about how in Kaljug the levels of spirituality are going down and the level of materialism and negativity goes up. But there is, after all, a time when the Imam's Zahurat will save all the Mu'mins from all this negativity. So I'll stop there about the Ginan, and just to perhaps remind all the listeners, remember, Ginans, our very noble spiritual heritage, which is our holy Ginans that we recite in Jamaat Khana. And I always say, I include in the Ginan our beautiful Qasidas, the Mankabats, the Masnavis, and other forms of devotional literature, where other da'is have brought forward by the permission of the Imam. And you remember, not long ago, our beloved Imam said, bring the tradition of Pir Sadruddin and Sayyidina Pir Nasr Khusru together. And only the Imam can give us that direction. And bit by bit by bit, we are learning about Qasidas and other recitations as our brothers in Central Asia and elsewhere are also learning about the Ginans and the Ginanic tradition. And that in itself is a miracle in our faith, because our beloved Imam is the one who brings these things together. Now that having said that, let's move to our subject for today, which is basically this pyramid of faith. Now, why am I calling it a pyramid? Actually, I should have had a slide so that you can see this pyramid, but I'm sure you can use your imagination. And what I mean by this pyramid of faith is that, as you know, the pyramid has an apex. So at the base of the pyramid is the larger chunk that is known, I call that the Shariat. And then if you divide this pyramid into 4 sections, and then you can make up what goes on top of Shariat goes the Tariqat, on top of the Tariqat goes the Hakikat, and above the Hakikat goes the Marifat, and it culminates into that point. So keep this image in mind, because it's important for what I will inshallah describe as we move forward with the other parts. And just to re-emphasize, this is intended to make sure we have a clear understanding what the relationship is, so that we have a framework that defines what we are saying and what we are doing. Now, as I begin this explanation, let me first of all together mention a quotation of Imam Mustansir Billah, our beloved 32nd Imam, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who has described the levels of the Shariat, Tariqat, and Hakikat. And I would like you, if possible, to remember this idea, this definition, this description our beloved Imam is giving, because this description will give us the foundation to build upon, and very nicely so. Because remember, in our tariqah, in our practice, right from the time of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right from the time of Hazrat Ali alayhi salam, the path that we have always followed till today is the path of Nur. We should never, ever, ever forget that, because if we forget this, then we will inadvertently, by mistake, take another road, which is not what we want. What we want is to know more about where we are walking and how this path of Nur is impacting our life today, and indeed how we continue to be in the path of Nur, so that in the end of our physical life, if Mawla wills, we can become one with this Nur. That's why this journey of Shariat, Tariqat, Hakikat, and Marifat has to be understood on the basis of this fundamental principle of Nur. Now, don't get lost, because I'm giving you, hopefully, a very powerful rope to hold on to it. When I say the path of Nur, from the time of Holy Prophet and Mawla Ali sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wherever there is the Imam, that is the path of Nur. Why? You know the answer. Because Mawla Bapa himself is Allah's Nur. It is his Nur. Mawla Bapa is that Nur. He is Allah's Nur. And wherever the Imam is in our history, that is the path of Nur. So if we maintain this principle in our mind, you will find it very easy to understand why I am addressing this topic, and hopefully it will help us as a framework to understand a deeper aspect of the faith. So Imam Shah Mustansir Billah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he says to us in the Holy Pandiyati Javan Mardi, our beloved Imam says that the real believer, the Mu'min, is one who, from the observances of the rules of the Shariat, arrives at the following of the rules of Tariqat, and from the Tariqat, from the latter, he arrives at the Hakikat. And the Hakikat is, our beloved Imam describes, the Hakikat is the real meaning. It is the batin of this Shariat. So, just to summarize quickly, and I will bring these summaries on and off so that you stay on the same level of thinking. Mawla Bapa says, our beloved 32nd Imam Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, the Mu'min is one who observes the rule of Shariat. And the rules of Shariat takes him to the Tariqat, the next level. And the Tariqat leads him to the Hakikat. And what is the Hakikat? The first point of explanation, our beloved Imam explains, Hakikat is the batin of Shariat. Do you see the connection? Do you see the relationship right here? So remember this key point. Shariat has a batin, inner meaning, a spiritual meaning. And this batin is the hakikat of Shariat. Now, then the Imam continues and says, and explains further, our beloved Imam says that Shariat may be compared to a candle. Shariat is like a candle. And the Tariqat is compared to a path, a road, a way. And the Hakikat is the destination, the manzil. So there is a candle, there is a path, and there is a destination. Then our beloved Imam explains further, and he says, one must strive to walk along the path, the correct path, lit by the candle, and reach the abode of Hakikat. You must walk on the correct path. It is lit by the candle, and it is taking you to the abode of Hakikat. And here, our beloved Imam comes with a stunning statement, and he says, the foundation of Hakikat is to recognize the Imam. The foundation of Hakikat is to recognize the Imam. Then our beloved Imam continues to explain. He says, the purpose, maqsood, the purpose of everything is its inner meaning, the batin, which forms its real substance, jawar, its essence and sweetness. Then our beloved Imam concludes, after giving all these steps, the Imam concludes and says, therefore, the ultimate purpose of the Shariat introduced by the Prophet was its inner meaning, the batin, which was the hakikat, that is the recognition of the Imam of the time. Please say salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So you can see that right at this beginning stage, the whole definition of the Shariat, Tariqat, and Hakikat is being given. Now, in this description, our beloved Imam, in this particular part of his writing, he did not mention the marifat. And let me tell you something about it now, then we can go back to the basics. So, if you achieve the state of hakikat, then there will be only one thing left to do. And you know what that is? That is the experience. Experience. You will experience it. And when you actually experience it, that is what we call marifat. So, if you have understood so far these stages, we can now go back and look at the notion of Sharia. As I said to you, remember, our objective is to identify the nur, the recognition of the Imam. Because you see, this foundation says, our holy Imam is very categoric. The ultimate purpose of this Shariat was the batin, which is the hakikat. And hakikat means to recognize the Imam. And there are different levels of recognition of the Imam. But remember, at the level of hakikat, what is that recognition? What is the recognition at the level of hakikat? That level of hakikat, that level of the recognition of the Imam, it is that level which our holy peers and da'is have explained into their writings and preaching to the Jamaat. And that is very unique to our tariqah. And we have to understand that, because this is a non-negotiable and it is not something that's cloudy or ambiguous. It is very straightforward what our holy peers have said, who the Imam is. So I am simply hinting to you now that this notion about who the Imam is very, very clearly articulated in our tariqah. No mistake, no ambiguity. There is no levels to kind of debate about it, because when the holy peer says, this is it, this is what the Imam is, then you have to decide. You have to decide how you will understand, and you will, inshallah, try to grasp that meaning. Now, when I say that you have to understand, I would like to use the framework given in the Quran. In the Quran, in chapter 33, verse 35, now I'll be very quick about this because we do want to complete this segment this evening, so next week we go to the next segment. But when I said to you that we need to ensure that you understand the level in which you function to understand this hakikat. So in the Quran, Allah describes that there are different stages of iman, of faith. Or you can say, if you like, if there are different stages of iman, then there are different categories or groups, if you like, of believers. And I think you understand that, because not everyone is always at the same stage, although we would have liked everybody to be at the same stage. And our holy peers have been very categoric as to what a mu'min is in the context of understanding the hakikat and eventually experiencing the marifat. So in the Quran, there are these 10 stages of iman or belief, beginning with the Muslimin, meaning the one who enters the faith, meaning the one who simply just accepts the faith but may not have belief. Now, I can go into very detailed description, but not necessary right now, just for you to get an overall view. So there is the Muslimin, there is the Mominin, and the Mominin, you know, he who believes, and the one who believes is the one who completely recognizes that belief is the most powerful weapon and gift blessed upon an individual to be able to remain on the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim. Then there is the Qanitin, the one who obeys. In other words, the obedience, the notion of obedience is ingrained here with the notion of belief. And then there is the Sadiqin, the one who speaks the truth, a truth bearer. Then there is the Sabirin, the one who perseveres, who stays strong into that path. Perseverance in a believer generates patience and many other qualities necessary to be able to achieve this hakikat. And then there is the Kashiyin, that is the one who fears God. Now, fear doesn't mean that one who is scared in that sense of the term. Fear actually means that you fear to upset your love between yourself and your Creator. Just like a lover would be afraid to do something wrong to upset his beloved. So you think about that context, and that is the notion of fear. Not only that, but when there is fear, in that positive sense, it also leads to purification. Then there is the Mutsadikin, that is the one who is keen to give alms, charity. And this category of people are truly very blessed because they help people in society based on Islamic law. And here it is the quality of a mu'min who basically spends everything in the name of his Creator. And he recognizes that this is not mine. What I have is a trust, which I share with others, just like Mola Bapa said to us, that wealth is necessary for you, your family, but keep what you need, share what you have in excess. And you understand that explanation coming from the Imam. Then there is the Sa'imin, the one who basically fasts. And there is a huge body of spiritual literature about the benefits of fasting and the various categories of fasting: physical fasting, the fasting of the heart, the fasting of keeping silence, and all these various levels of fasting that are there. And then the ninth one is the Hafizin, that is those who are careful about their chastity, which means not to do anything that is forbidden or harmful to one's body, mind, and spirit. And then there is the 10th category, which is the Zakirin. And the Zakirin is the one who does zikr, the one who is constantly blessed to remember his Creator. And this notion of keeping zikr and being constantly in the state of zikr is the ability to maintain the contact. Now, having given you this brief description of the 10 categories, can you see that all of these in one shape or form we have in our tariqah also? Means in our Ismaili Satpant Dharam, all of these are there in one shape or form. But the way it is there in the way in which our beloved Imams and holy peers have guided us into that path. Now, as we proceed, let me here bring in the whole notion of Sharia in a very simple overview form. Like I said, this is such a vast area and an interesting area, but there are certain points necessary for us. And remember what I said in the beginning? Try to identify where our concept of nur fits inside here, so that you have an understanding why our beloved Imam, like I described, said that the true believer, using the knowledge of that Sharia, must go and walk and on the path of this tariqat and get to the hakikat. So what is this word Sharia? In Arabic, the word Sharia means a path, just like when you see a path to walk on. But more specifically, it means, when you look at it historically, it means a path to the watering place. Now you can imagine in a place like Arabia, when the heat can be scorching heat, and water is gold. So to find a path that takes you, that in a desert, that takes you to a watering place, it's an amazing saving grace. So the path is one, symbolically in this case, the Sharia is the path by God's law to spiritual salvation. The real meaning of the Sharia is this, is a path where the believer walks on, following God's law that's supposed to take him to salvation. And I want to underline here the word God's law, meaning it has to be the divine law. That's why Sharia is often identified by saying divine law. So it is a system of ethics, a system of law, fiqh, Muslim calls it fiqh, that is meant to produce or give governance, guidance to humankind and guide everything people do. That's why it is often said that in Islam, this is not just a statement, it is a way of life. And even Maulana Bapa has spoken about it, and I'll come to it just very quickly. Now, the question is that if you look at Islam, that first and foremost, when you see the time of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at first, Muslims during the time of the Holy Prophet, they relied on God's revelation, the Quran. Every Muslim relied on the Quran because that was the revelation that came. And they also relied on the examples of the Prophet's life, which they call Sunnah. Now remember, we are defining the word Sharia, so don't go anywhere else. Stay with me. So there is the Quran, the revelation that came to the Prophet, and there is the actions of the Prophet's examples that they call Sunnah. So, what happened when the Holy Prophet passed away? Until then, everybody relied on the Quran and the Sunnah. But once the Prophet passed away, there was a monumental challenge that happened at the Prophet's death. The first biggest challenge was Muslims believed that the guidance basically ceased because it was the Prophet who was giving this guidance. But remember, only those made that statement that guidance ceased who did not follow what the Holy Prophet had said that after him will be the imamat. And those who did not follow the imamat of Hazrat Ali sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they remain only with the Quran and the Sunnah, and in fact, they came to be known as the people of the Sunnah, or they were Sunnis. And those who followed the imamat, they came to be known as Shias. Now, let's just continue a bit here to show historically what happened. That over the next 100 years after the Holy Prophet's death, the Muslim community that was very small comparatively during the time of the Holy Prophet, Islam rapidly expanded from the believers who lived in Makkah and Medina. Islam went outside the bounds of the Arabian Peninsula, and it expanded all the way from Spain to Central Asia. You can imagine the vast expansion that took place in that 100 years. Now, here comes the challenge. Here comes the big question. The question was, here was the Holy Quran, here was the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet. The question of how to apply, how to make use of the Holy Quran, of the revelation, to everyday life across the various cultures of the growing Muslim community that was becoming even more complex. So imagine if you go from Spain to Central Asia, how many different communities and languages were there? And the question was, how do you apply the Sunnah? How do you apply the Quran? Because the Holy Prophet was not physically there anymore. So within Sunni Islam, the whole idea of applying the rules of the Quran, the guidance in the Quran, interpreting the Quran, and of course looking at the example and actions of the Prophet, the Sunnah, became a fundamental basis of law, the Quran and the Sunnah. But the question was, how do you apply it? Different language, different cultures, different country, because this was not Muslims of Mecca and Medina or within Arabia. They were way outside of it. So, despite the challenges they had within that 100 years, by the way, all of this did not just stop there. It went on for 300 years after the Holy Prophet to see how various schools of thought came about to try to integrate the notion of the Sharia as a way of living and as a basis of applying the rules and the teachings of the Prophet to one's life. So it was a big challenge. Now, what happened in this context? Again, I just described to you. So here, by the way, think about it. Think about it. Within 100 years, Islam went from Spain to Central Asia. But remember, according to Shia Islam, the Imam was also there. Meaning, wherever the Imams were, after Mawla Ali alayhi salam. And we know there was Imamat in Arabia, and then within Imamat in Arabia, all the way down to Imam Jafar Sadiq sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and then from Imam Jafar Sadiq, Imam Ismail, our beloved sixth Imam, from which Ismailism takes its name. So the point I'm trying to make, while all of this was happening, there was the lineage of Imamat there also, where the Imams were active and participant in all of these development within Islam, and how the Nur of Imamat was guiding the Murids and the believers of that time, as our beloved Imam guides us today. So the question was, that there was an attempt to standardize Islamic jurisprudence, and that created a lot of discussion and disagreements as to how to apply the law. So, should it be restricted to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, or could the jurists, the people doing fiqh at that time, could they incorporate their own analysis and reason? This was a big challenge. Let me give you an example. So, before I get there, understand this. By the 8th century, so now we are looking at almost 200 years after the Holy Prophet, by the 8th century, there was such a big difference amongst Muslims. It was a really big diversity of views, and there were contradictory views one to another. And by the 8th century, these arguments and analysis and discourses differed widely on the application of the Sharia. And as a result of that, different elements were added. So just to summarize, there was the Quran, there was the Sunnah, the actions of the Prophet and what he said. And to that, some jurists added what is known two other sources of law in addition to the Quran and the Sunnah. And they called it the consensus of the community. They called it ijma, and they call it analogical reasoning, which is qiyas. So now there was 4 sources of law: the Quran, the Sunnah, ijma, and qiyas. So things became even more complicated and things became even more disputable. So what happened here? I'll just conclude that very quickly because we are getting to the core of what I want to add about the notion of Sharia. So remember, as this Sharia expanded after the death of the Holy Prophet, these are the challenges that the Muslim communities, particularly within Sunnism, faced. But within Shiism, the living Imam was there. And the followers of the holy Imams in that period, they follow the guidance of the living Imam, understanding that the Imam himself is the successor of the Prophet, both spiritually and materially. And the Imam was empowered by virtue of his position to give divine guidance. Sunnis believe divine guidance ceased. Shias believe that divine guidance continued with Maula Ali and the holy Imams. So there was another happening that happened. But as I go there, let me give you an example that the Holy Prophet exercised during his lifetime. There was a companion of the Prophet by the name of Muad ibn Jabal. He was a companion of the Prophet. And he was sent by the Holy Prophet to Yemen to teach the people of Yemen about Islam. So he was like a missionary appointed by the Holy Prophet to go to Yemen to teach people there. But what happened there? So before he actually went to his mission, look what happened. The Holy Prophet, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Holy Prophet asked him how he would settle any dispute among the Yemenis. Because remember, he's going to teach Islam. And he's a missionary on behalf of Islam that the Prophet sent. So the Prophet says, when you go there, suppose there is a dispute. How will you settle the dispute among the people whom you are bringing Islam? And he answered by referring to the Quran. In other words, he said to the Prophet, I'll go into the Quran, and if there is a dispute, I'll find the answer in the Quran, and I will settle the dispute by showing to the people, this is what Allah says. And then the Holy Prophet said that suppose the answer is not in the Quran. Are you understanding this? The Holy Prophet said, suppose the answer is not in the Quran. Then Ibn Jabal says, then I'm going to find the answer by following your ways, meaning the Sunnah. Then the Holy Prophet said to him again, and he said, and if there is no precedent for your question in the Sunnah, what will you do? So it's not in the Quran, it's not in the Sunnah. Then what will you do? Where will you find the answer? As you understand, this was not like he could pick up a cell phone and speak to the Holy Prophet and said, I have this problem, can you tell me how to guide it? The Holy Prophet physically was very far away, and of course, as you know, when he passed away, the same problem arose. So he said to the Holy Prophet, if it's not in the Quran, it's not in the Sunnah, then he said, I will exercise my own reason and judgment. Are you following this? So he said, I'll decide what should be the answer. And in this situation, where the Quran and Sunnah provide no answers, and where no consensus, meaning the ijma part, could be reached, jurists or people responsible to analyze and execute a decision, they say they would follow Ibn Jabal, that is his example, by the use of their own judgment to arbitrate any legal issues or concern. And you know, this notion, the point I'm telling you all of this is because I'm bringing this element in, that this notion that if it's not in the Quran, it's not in the Sunnah of the Prophet, then I will use my own intelligence and reason to give that guidance or to arbitrate any legal concern. This concept is called ijtihad. Ijtihad means to exercise or to strive intellectually. Now, this created so many problems in Islamic theological and Islamic jurisprudence. It was truly, when you look at the roots, everything was haywire. And as a result of these disputes and disagreement, what happened? 4 schools of Sunnism became, they flowered, they came up. And some of the leaders of one school only accepted the Quran and the Sunnah, and the others accepted the Quran and the Sunnah and Ijma and Qiyas. So it became really a very serious problem. So Sunnism, after the Holy Prophet, became divided into these 4 major schools. And these 4 major schools are known as the Hanafi, the Maliki, the Shafi, and the Hanbali. Now, there was a 5th school also, eventually known as the Jafari, taking the name from Imam Jafar Sadiq sallallahu alayhi wasallam, where all the Shias belong to that school, so to speak. By the way, including Ismaili interpretation of the faith of Islam is part of the Jafri school. Now, as I said, I'm not particularly focusing on all those histories in depth, but I'm giving you an overview so I can make my point to you. So in time, if you look at historically, a number of distinct schools of law emerged in different parts of the Muslim empire. And then from the 13th century, from the 13th century onwards, 4 schools predominated Sunni Islam. And I mentioned the name of these 4 schools: Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki, and Shafi. And what happened there, just to give you a bit of a thing, that the Hanafi and Maliki school, they basically accepted to remain focused on the Quran and in the Sunnah. So these 2 schools, although they had the big differences, but they only used the Quran and the Sunnah to give their interpretation to their followers. And the Shafi and the Hanbali, they used the 4 bases of law, the 4 sources: the Quran, the Sunnah, Ijma, and Qiyas. Now, it is something to understand that how could people, after the death of the Holy Prophet, when they did not follow the Imam, that all these divisions in Islam happened. And as I said, the story is very interesting, but it can be dry and you might get bored. So I don't want to go into all those details, but simply to say, these 4 schools basically emerged and they became predominant in Sunni Islam. So just to conclude this, and I'll tell you, those who follow the Shafi school, mean the Shafi interpretation of the message of the Holy Quran, and belong to the Shafi school, they predominantly are in India and Southeast Asia. So those Sunnis who are in India and Southeast Asia, they follow the Shafi school interpretation. And then the Hanbali school focused on the Quran and Sunnah alone, and Shafi rejected that basis. But Hanbalism, the Hanbali school, is the official school of law in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Muslims living there, they follow the Hanbali school. And the adherents of Shafi school predominates in India and Southeast Asia. The 4th and the smallest school in Sunni law, named, as I said, who followed Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they were the ones in this particular part. And of course, the 5th school of law, which is the Jafri school, and there's other one related to the Shia interpretation down in history. So, a number of important points to make here. That remember, these various schools of law came 300 years after the Holy Prophet. There was this long history. It was not like immediately the Prophet, when passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all this school formed. It was a very lengthy historical, theological combination of events that led to the emergence of this 4 school becoming predominant in Sunni Islam. The point of all of this, including, of course, in the Jafri school, the 5th school, is that their intention was to develop the laws of Sharia. They were intending to interpret the message of the Holy Quran and that of the Holy Prophet, and how to apply it to the culture, the community, the people over time, and make that the law. And you can see those who thought they would follow the Quran and thought they followed the Sunnah wasn't enough. So they added the other two schools. They added the ijma and qiyas, meaning the consensus of the community, and the analogical reasoning. And there are lots of things written in history in Islam to see how things went wrong with many of these things. So as I continue, let me here just give you perhaps a very simple example. Let us say that we decide to go and visit a planet like Mars. And I say Mars because it's the red planet, and Mars has a very long history of trying to understand whether life exists on Mars or perhaps other planet. And we have also sent, as you know, many probes on Mars, and the last one was called Curiosity. And that probe is investigating the rocks and the soil and the atmosphere and all those things, collecting information that perhaps whenever the occasion will arise for human being and we are able to build a spaceship, a rocket to go to Mars, we will know a lot about Mars. And you know, there are those red channels, and there are all kinds of mysteries associated with Mars over the long history that human beings have been viewing Mars. So let's say we go to Mars, and let's say as Muslims in the 21st century, maybe 22nd century, we go to Mars, and now we have to say our prayers, the salat, or in Persian we say namaz. Now, according to the teachings of the prayers, traditionally speaking, you turn towards Mecca. You face towards Mecca to say your salat and your prayers. Are we not going to say our prayers on Mars? There is no Mecca in Mars per se, mean the actual physical Mecca. So where do we turn? Which direction do we turn to validate our prayers? And if we are a congregation of hundreds of Muslims, there is no Mecca in Mars. Now I know there are people who will use analogical reasoning, and people will use this consensus to say, well, let's decide how we can say our prayers and how we will decide which way and which direction to turn. It's a problem. And this is a very simple problem. Maybe people have come up with some kind of answers that is satisfactory. But there are, in this sense, thousands of problems in the 21st century, and of course in the centuries past, that the Muslim community faced in seeking to answer the problem. Because here is the thing. If the Sharia, like I said before, by definition means a road which leads to God and eventually salvation. So the point is, with the law of the Sharia, or the Sharia supposed to be theoretically that all life is a journey through this temporary world to the divine presence. So why as a Muslim am I supposed to follow the Sharia? Because it is the road that takes me to God, into this temporary time in this world, and it is going to take me, if I follow those laws, to the divine presence. So how a person lives, both in private and in social life, in accordance to the divine command and the divine will, that is what is identified to be the Sharia. So when you ask a person, and we can ask ourselves, are you living your life according to the divine will? Your private life, your social life? Put a question mark there. Then there is, it is the Sharia supposed to be, it is the law according to which Allah says to Muslims, how they should live. And then, generally speaking, religion to a Muslim is the divine law, which includes not only universal moral principles, but that includes details how the human being should conduct his life. Now you can see, if you put this into perspective, how will you make a decision based on the Quran and Sunnah and teaching or sayings of the Prophet, the Hadith and so on? How? That was 1500 years ago, and we are now 1500 years hence. So, are you individually going to go into the Quran and search the meaning and have a debate and decide who believes in this and which groups will vote for that? These are all things that are happening and have been happening. You can see how challenging this exercise could be, even from the perspective that the writings of the Quran itself, and Mola Bapa has said to us, there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of interpretation of the Quran over the long history from the time of the Holy Prophet to the present. So which one are you going to follow? If the Sharia is supposed to be the path that leads you to the divine presence and supposed to be the law that Allah says He wants mankind or human being to follow, it poses a challenge. And the Sharia is supposed to be also that which guides a Muslim towards understanding the divine will by indicating which acts and objects form the religious point of view. And you know how that is done? Again, just for your information. So the notion of action, the notion of action and the notion of bearing an object within that context is classified under five objectives. So the one that says wajib, obligatory, that this action is obligatory, this way of doing things is obligatory. Secondly, manzub, that is that which is recommended or meritorious. Third, haram, is forbidden. Number 4, makruh, reprehensible, detestable. And mubah, that is indifferent. So, as an example, if you and I were deciding, taking some kind of an action, how do I decide? Is this action good? Is it bad? Or is it ugly? So in Islam, this category, especially within the context of decision making within the Sharia and its extension, the Muslim has been asked to make this consideration. Is this obligatory? Is this recommended? Is it meritorious? Is it forbidden? Is it reprehensible? Or is it indifferent? How do you make the decision? Because there will be many things you can pick out into these histories and find out about how people basically acted. So let's go the next step now. You understand, generally speaking, from this history, from the time of the Prophet, the 4 schools, the 5th school, and then these various challenges, how Muslim jurists at time to basically figure out what they need to do to create the path of Sharia. And let me tell you, there have been thousands of books written about these. So That's why I didn't go into all those intricacies, but I'm coming to my point. So let's take an example of how mystics, for example, like Ibn Arabi, the most celebrated Sufi sage, wrote also that there are these four levels: the Shariat, the Tariqat, the Hakikat, and the Marifat. So Ibn Arabi says that the Sharia is the exoteric law. It's the exoteric religious law. And he goes on to say that this first level, now remember, he's speaking in the context of Sufism, which is now coming close to the meaning the Imam gave us. Remember the initial meaning that the Holy Imam gave? That the purpose of the Shariat was its inner meaning, the Batin, which was the Hakikat, which was the recognition of the Imam. So we're coming to that just in a few seconds. So Ibn Arabi says, this first level is the Sharia, which is the foundation of the next three levels. Now remember, he's speaking from the point of view of Sufism. So Ibn Arabi says, and he gives the same kind of meaning. He says the Sharia means the road, and he says it is a clear track, a well-traveled route that anyone can follow. And he defines to say the Sharia consists of the teachings of morality and ethics found in most religion. Without an ordered life, he alludes to the fact that if there is no ordered life, there is no order in society or group built upon solid moral and ethical principle, no mysticism can flourish. So here, Ibn Arabi connects the notion of Sharia to mysticism by linking it to moral life and ethical principles. Very important idea related to the Sharia. He also explains, and this is a very important explanation, and please remember, we are only talking about level 1 today, that of the Sharia. Ibn Arabi says that at the level of the Sharia, when you look at the mystical context, it says there is this saying that at the level of the Sharia, there is yours and there is mine. So there is these two distinct, separate identities or relationship between people. So there is yours and there is mine. Remember, this is a key term. And that is, Ibn Arabi say that by having this understanding about yours and mine, that religious law, or in this sense, the Sharia, guarantees individual rights and ethical relations between people. And that is true to the extent the Sharia is itself applied. So just to bring a bit of a conclusion here, the Shariat is the law of conduct, which by definition and intent, it is totally Zahiri, although in mystical sense, looked at in terms of principle. So the Shariat is the basis that regulates the deeds and the behavior of the follower. And I've given you enough historical precedents to understand what that regulation should be. Because remember, is it good? Is it bad? Is it ugly? Is it forbidden? Is it meritorious? Is it advisable? And so on and so forth. Now comes the crux of the whole idea about the Sharia. Many of you, especially those of you who remember Maulana Bapa's visit in 1976 in Pakistan, and Maulana Bapa was invited in the famous Sirat conference, meaning the conference about the history and life of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Maulana Bapa gave a speech in that conference, which is available online somewhere. Let me tell you, this speech was not only important then, it was a visionary speech our beloved Imam gave, and even in today's context of life and society, this speech is even more important than at any time we have seen since that conference. And in that conference, there were 172 Muslim scholars who came. Now, I'm just going to select pieces of the speech to connect to what my lecture was today about the Sharia. Now remember, the whole idea was, in presenting to you this understanding of Sharia, the idea was that are we actually really, now when I say we, I'm not talking about us Ismailis specifically, generally speaking within the Muslim Ummah, how this is understood. Are we actually following the guidance and teachings and the divine law as the Holy Prophet intended? Well, look at the speech, and our beloved Imam says into this speech, in the face of this changing world, and the world has been changing even more so than before, which was once a universe to us and is now no more than an overcrowded island confronted with a fundamental challenge to our understanding of time, surrounded by foreign fleet of cultural and ideological ships which have broken loose. Look what the Imam says. I ask, do we have a clear, firm, and precise understanding of what Muslim society is to be in times to come? Look at the question. Do we have a clear, firm, and precise understanding of what Muslim society is to be in times to come? So the Imam is speaking about the future. And then he says, and if, as I believe, the answer is uncertain, where else can we search than in the Holy Quran and in the example of Allah's last and final prophet? Question mark. You can see Maulana Bapa is speaking here about the Quran and the example of the prophet, the Sunnah. So using those terminology, he didn't use those, but of course he mentions the Quran. But then look what our beloved Imam says, that there is no justification for delaying the search for the answer to this question by the Muslims of the world, because we have the knowledge that Islam is Allah's final message, the Quran is final book, and Muhammad is last prophet. So 3 points Imam made. Now let me give you a point of connection. The same 3 points are in the Ismaili constitution, where the Imam speaks about our constitution in the preamble, speaks about Allah's final message, the Quran, his final book, and the Holy Prophet being his last prophet. And then the Imam says, we are blessed that the answers drawn from these sources, which sources? The Quran, the life of the Holy Prophet, and the final message, as the demand of his time increases, every Muslim will find it more and more difficult to seek for himself the answer to the fundamental question of how he should live his life for it to be truly Muslim. Isn't that what all Muslims always say? We have to be like true Muslims. Our beloved Imam is raising this question. How should you live your life to be truly Muslim? So, Imam says we have the knowledge of Islam is Allah's final message. The Quran is final book. And the Holy Prophet, he is the last prophet of God. So we are blessed that the answers drawn from these sources guarantee that neither now nor at any time in the future we will be going astray. Remember what going astray is? That you are not in the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim. So our beloved Imam raised a fundamental question way back then into his speech. Now look what he says. He continues, and the beloved Imam says that answers which will have to be practical and realistic in the world today and tomorrow have to be found. And why? Because if you don't, there will be the force of circumstances, our beloved Imam explained, which will impose upon us through our default in not having suitably prepared ourselves for the future. Ways of life which are not or should not be ours. We must ourselves design the path we should tread. So now, our beloved Imam goes further. So in seeking to define what our Islamic society should be in times ahead, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years hence, the Imam is saying, we should, I believe, be aware that the Muslim of this world covers such amazing range of historical, ethnic, and cultural background that a completely monolithic answer may not be found. So, to put it simply, there is no one answer that will satisfy all these societies, not today, not even into the future. And our beloved Imam says in his speech, I am convinced of, on the other hand, that we do want to avoid so much diversity that our Muslim countries are in conflict among themselves, or they are so divided that they are incapable of successfully or facing common enemies by their cultural, religious, national, or otherwise that they are. So our beloved Imam continues, and I'm being very selective. So look at the question how our beloved Imam answered, okay? Let me turn now to the question of what Muslim society should seek to be in the years ahead. Remember at one point he said the answer is uncertain, but he said we have the resources, we can find it. So here Maulana Bapa is guiding these 172 scholars, or at least giving his point of view by the fact that he's giving this speech. And look what our beloved Imam is saying, that what a Muslim society should seek to be in the years ahead. And our beloved Imam says, look at his definition. I'm coming then to make all the connections in a second. That Islam, as even non-Muslims have observed, is a way of life. Very important to know. This means, and listen to the words of our beloved Imam, what does this way of life means? This means, our beloved Imam says, that every aspect of the individual's daily existence is guided by Islam. His family relations. Think about this. His business relations. His education. His health. the means and manner by which he gains his livelihood, his philanthropy, what he sees and what he hears around him, what he sees and what he hears around him, what he reads, the way he regulates his time. How are you using your time? The building in which he lives, learns, and earns. Do you see the level of details our beloved Imam is speaking about what should be the process or the objective of this investigation about how should an Islamic society seek to be in the years ahead? If you take each one of these elements and you think about it in the context of the modern society in which we are living, because we are supposed to apply this in our daily existence, our beloved Imam says it should be guided by, Islam should guide it should be the basis to guide our daily existence. Our family relations. Look at what's happening today in North America and other places in the so-called civilized part of the world. Families are being torn apart. Families are not what they used to be. And family relations are very different today than they ever were. Because what is guiding family relations today is not what it was understood before. And then business relations. Look at the amount of fraud, lies, scam, and all those negativities that exist today about how people are getting cheated, how people are getting coerced, how people are falling into the trap of this ugly interaction. So, business relations, education. Do you think education in the Western world is guided by Islam? No. There is education, admirable education. We need that education. But it's the education of the secular world, of the material world. And it's the education of the competitive. Mullah Bapa said meritocracy, very important. What is lacking in this education is the presence of God, the presence of the divine. And then is health. Needless to say, you know what that means. The means and manner by which a human being gains his livelihood. If you connect that to the ugliness, the negativity of the business relation, you know what I'm getting to. What he reads. Think yourself, how can Islam guide what you read? The way you regulate your time, the building in which you live, learn, and earn. How is all that going to happen? It's a big challenge. Each one of us are asking that question. Now, to conclude the speech, before we get into a very short discussion, to conclude the speech, Mullah Bapa says, now remember we were talking about all those laws, divine law, to guide the human being, to walk on the part of this divine law, the Sharia, so that we may eventually end up in front of the divine presence. So we are talking about divine laws. And Mullah Bapa says, now you've heard this before many, many times, because even recently during the Eid Miladun Nabi, we talked about the Holy Prophet, that the Holy Prophet's life gives us every fundamental guideline that we require to resolve the problem as successfully as our human mind and intellect can visualize. So the Imam is very blunt in responding to the question. He's saying the example of the Holy Prophet, his example of integrity, loyalty, honesty, generosity of both means and time, his solicitude for the poor, the weak and the sick, his steadfastness in friendship, his humility in success, his magnanimity in victory, his simplicity, his wisdom in conceiving new solutions for problems which could not be solved by traditional methods, without affecting the fundamental concept of Islam. Remember this word, fundamental concept of Islam. Surely, Mola Bapa says in his speech that all these are foundations, and now comes the key word. Now comes the key concept. What is he saying? Surely all these are foundation, correctly understood and sincerely interpreted, must enable us to conceive what should be a truly modern and dynamic society in the years ahead. Now here comes my part of the discussion very quickly. In our tariqah, all these functions throughout the last 1500 years have been carried out by the living Imam of the time. We do not face the problem of selecting which interpretation in the Quran or the life of the Holy Prophet should be valid and applied into our daily life. Because in the case of our dharam, in the case of Ismaili Satpant dharam, first and foremost, we recognize Mola Bapa is Noor. That same Noor that revealed Islam, that same Noor that brought the Holy Quran, that same Noor from which the Holy Prophet Muhammad's Noor came into manifestation. Now think about this combination. Today, in the 21st century, as we live in society today, all our Jamaat, all across the globe, they are benefited and they are so fortunate. Why? When Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was alive 1500 years ago, at that time, the Holy Prophet's Noor and in the presence of Maula Ali, they guided the Muslim community. And there was no problem or dispute because whatever problem they had, you heard the speech. Maula Bapa says the Prophet's life itself of integrity, of guidance, of finding solutions, not outside the traditional means, all of that the Prophet used to do. So who's doing that today? We are looking the larger framework. In the Sunni world of Muslims, there are those 4 schools and many other interpretations and division, how they view the Sharia and they view the application of the Sharia. But you see that in 1976, 172 scholars got together to deliver their papers and research, and Maula Bapa was invited to speak, to say, how do we decide a Muslim society should be? And the fact is, the same Noor that guided the Muslims at that time is the same Noor of Ali and Nabi that is present in Maula Bapa, that is guiding our tariqah. But not only that. Today, Maula Bapa himself is guiding the Muslim world because he is the descendant of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the descendant of the Holy Prophet. And think about this in a spiritually mature manner. That same Noor that is in the Holy Prophet is in Maula Bapa himself. The same Noor that was in Hazrat Ali is in Maula Bapa himself. Maula Bapa himself is the Noor of Ali and Nabi. Both of the Noor are in him. Now, in our tariqah language, we call Noor of Ali, Imam, and the Noor of Nabi, we call Pir. So Maula Bapa himself is Imam and Pir, or Shah and Pir. Now, I've said many things about this in the past, so you understand this. Can you see the point that I am making into this first segment of my lecture? That even those ideologies that many people in our tariqah thinks about Shariat has to do with understanding where is the presence of the Nur. So we have to be careful that the Shariat isn't something that, as some people might, I would say, wrongly interpret and basically say that, you know what, it is just following the book, following the fast, following all these other elements that are very, very strongly rooted in the Sharia. And people, unfortunately, seeks to define what a Muslim is by saying, well, this is quote unquote the Sharia that you follow. That is not limited to that. There is the identification in the whole idea of the Sharia based on the fact there is the presence of the living Imam in the world today who guides us into all those decision-making in the Sharia. How to live your life, what to consider, what to leave out, how to do our religious tasks, and all of these. Can you tell me that this is not being done? Look at what Mullah Bapa said. Do you remember? His Nur has indicated to you where to turn in spiritual and worldly matters. You think that did not happen during the time of the Holy Prophet? It did. It was the Nur of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a final prophet of Allah that guided people. The point I'm trying to make very strongly, that same Nur that was during the time of the Prophet to guide the people in the day-to-day manner, decision and this and that, today Maula Bapa is fulfilling. Maula Bapa is fulfilling the same function from that external Zahiri point of view. But it is rooted in spirituality. Because Maula Bapa says, we are Shia, Imami, Ismaili Muslims. And Maula Bapa said, Shia, Imami, Ismaili Islam. So we include in this equation the manifestation of the Nur of Maula. And remember, when speaking about the Quran, Maula Bapa himself is the spoken Quran. Quran and Natik. So, you and I don't have to worry about digging and basically disputing or be at par, in disparities of the meaning. And no, when it comes to the point of religious practice, now remember, I'm being very specific. Which practice? That practice in the Sharia, which is the path that leads to salvation and in the divine presence. That is how Sharia has been defined. Then that very path is what we say in our tariqah is the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim, because that's where the Nur is. That's where the divine presence is. And that is following the divine law. Now, all of these are in the teachings of the Prophet, is it not? Did the Prophet not say, I'm leaving behind me the book of God, the Quran, and my progeny, the Imamat, and they are both tied together, and they will never be separated. So think about this. Holy Prophet's hadith, teaching of the Holy Prophet, categorically states Imam and Quran are together. They are not separate. Meaning, it is the Imam who gives meaning and interpretation and it gives guidance and makes the Quran explicit. It gives the talim and the ta'wil to the Jamaat. You can see how important this concept is. So we should not say that Sharia is not something that we look at it constructively. It is, because it is the very divine law the Holy Prophet had asked us to follow. But our meaning, our interpretation comes from the living Imam. And wherever there is the living Imam, it is the Imam who will make those decisions for the Jamaat. And you know that. We all know that. And therefore, we never have this dispute with different schools, different authorities, different jurists. We always say, when we are following our path, what is the guidance of the Holy Imam? And that becomes the foundation to understand why the Holy Prophet introduced the Shariat. Why? For the purpose of the tariqat, to go to the hakikat, and the inner meaning of the Shariat is the hakikat, which is the recognition of the Imam of the time. What does that mean? It means you cannot have the Shariat without the living Imam. And all the arguments which I very basically brought you just a few minutes ago, how the Imam does that for us, that is our meaning. That is our interpretation, that Shariat cannot be there without the recognition of the Imam, because that is the purpose of the Shariat, which is the hakikat, which is the inner meaning, the batin, which is the recognition of the Holy Imam. And even at this stage of the Shariat, even if you say the recognition is the physical aspect of the Imam, which is the physical manifestation of Allah's nur. Now, in order to go higher than that, we will have to explore the tariqah, which is next Thursday, part 2, how we go to that level. Thank you for this evening, and I hope it wasn't too dry, but it was necessary to lay this foundation, and I hope that you can increase your level of confidence and also have a better framework of the knowledge in terms of how we look at the whole concept of the Sharia as the reason why it was introduced by the Prophet, to seek its batin, its inner meaning, to understand at that level the recognition of the Imam. Thank you. Mola bless all of you. Now I know some people may need to exit, but Mola bless all of you with barakat. Mola bless all of you with the fulfillment of all your wishes. Mola Bapa's hand be upon all of you to guide you, to protect you, to keep you safe. May Mola Bapa's talika that came today to the whole Jamaat globally, may you are blessed to apply this talika of the Imam, that is Mola Bapa's guidance to us all, to keep us all safe. There is Mushkil Asan, and there is everything that Mola Bapa seeks for us. May your desire, your aspiration always be fulfilled. May you remain in the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim, the path of Nur. May Mola Bapa's Nur be with you to accept your tasbih, your ibadat, your prayers, to you, to your whole family. May Mola Bapa's Nur guide you. May Mola Bapa keep you safe. May Mola Bapa bless you with Zahiri and Batini Didar. And whatever your wishes are, may Mola Bapa fulfill them to the fullest. Ameen. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being here this evening. And thank you for your patience and due diligence in allowing me to present to you this information today. Nusri, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. H, on behalf of all over 250 people that have shown up today, Tuesday, November the 3rd, 2020. And just by listening to you, you have put us all into a marifati state anyways. So there are about 4 questions lined up, and this is an exit point if people want to leave. And you have given us your blessing. So we would just like to share our prayers with you. And we all pray that may you always be blessed with Mola's choicest blessings.
Amen.
And may he fulfill all your good wishes.
Amen. Amen.
And I think there was a lady lined up for Ginan. We haven't been able to get in touch with her. I tried by chat. So if she is here and she wants to unmute, she had a Ginan for us. I believe it's Shirin Pir Mahmud.
Can we recite the Ginan?
Yes.
We can recite the Ginan today and also next week, because this Ginan, I think that's the one that we have.
Yes.
It really identifies in the Ginan these stages. So Shirin Bhai, please say the Ginan.
Gat mahe milo nito nito paheli ye mano shariyat gat mahe milo nito nito paheli ye mano shariyat tarikat aur hakikat tarikat aur hakikat मारिफत में मन कुमार तुम चेतना मेरा.
Wonderful, Shirin Bhai. Thank you. Thank you. This Ginan is foundational for this lecture. Inshallah, next week, I will request you to recite this Ginan in the beginning again. And as the Ginan explained, the first stage is the stage of the Shariat. And to the best of my ability, for the time given this evening, I have spoken about this. And we will make the connection with the next stage, and how wonderfully Sayyidina Imam Begum has explained this stage of the Shariat and the Tariqat and the Haqiqat and the Marifat. Mola bless you, Shirin Bhai, with good health and barakah, and for your seva and your service. Please be there next week when I will be requiring this Ginan to pursue my second phase of the lecture. Thank you. Thank you, Mola bless you.
Okay, so going back to the questions, and as we can tell, you are not feeling well today, so we are going to restrict it to 4 questions and then call it a night.
Yes, thank you.
So this question, I don't know if you want to answer today or another day. It was about the Chogariya. They want to know what is a Chogariya, what is the difference between morning and evening Chogariya, why we recite the Tasbih, and why it's on a Thursday.
Yes, these are amazing questions, but just maybe something there. Look, the morning Chogariya is a spiritual reflection of the evening Chogariya. How? Like I mentioned to you earlier on, that one of the evening Chogariya has to do with the Zahurat, meaning the manifestation of the Imam for the whole planet and the whole world. And that is the physical manifestation. But in the morning, we speak about the spiritual manifestation. And that spiritual manifestation is rooted into the notion of saying the evening Chogrias. And as I said, I will maybe describe this thing a bit more in detail, because it can take a good 45 minutes to an hour to go to all the various stages of all the Chogrias that we have. But it is very nice to have heard these Chogrias today.
Thank you. There is a question about the stages. Is Marifat the highest stage, or is that something beyond Marifat? How does that relate to Fanafila and Bakabila and all the others? Will you be covering that also in your later lectures?
Well, you'll have to wait until we get to part 4 of the lecture, when we will, inshallah, say whatever we can about Marifat at the time, and hopefully you will have enough pointers to seek to understand that, because the question is asked, at least I can say this much. If you are seeking to position our tariqah in that context, then it is indeed a marifati tariqah.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about your speeches. It says there were 2 speeches you referred to. One was the Sirat conference, and they missed the other one. What was the other speech that you referred?
No, it was only the one speech. The speech that Hazima made in I have the reference here. It was the presidential address by Maulana Hazimam at the International Sirat Conference in Karachi on the 12th of March, 1976.
Okay, there's a question here. Betul Khial Sataro is coming up. Is there anything we can do to prepare? And will you be speaking just as long, because there's Betul Khial Sataro the next day, for next week?
I think the Sataro starts next Friday. Coming up next Friday. So perhaps in the Monday or Tuesday lecture, I can take a few minutes in the beginning to explain Betul Khial Sataro, but simply to say this is a Sataro for spiritual enlightenment, not physical thing, not material thing, not worldly thing. It is for spiritual enlightenment. And it is to be practiced for 7 days, those who are able to go. And those who would like to participate in that Sataro, given the circumstances, nothing stops you to get up at home to say your prayers for this Sataro. But inshallah, I will explain more in detail the whole concept, if not in the Monday lecture, in the Tuesday for sure.
Okay, I think that's wraps up for all the questions we had in the chat. I don't think I see anybody's hand raised. And so I think we can call it a night if nobody else has any other questions. Yeah, you're off the hook.
Okay, wonderful. My apologies, I have a bit of a congestion, so but inshallah, I hope you got the information right, and we will pick up the pieces again in the next lecture next week. Mola bless you all. Mola bless you, Nusi, for your participation, and to Faiza that was on earlier on. I know Nayab is somewhere there, and Yasmin P, and other hosts and co-hosts are around. Mola bless you all on behalf of everyone. Barakat, happiness, and fulfillment of all your wishes in every way. Yali madad to all, and Mola bless you with barakat in all that you do. Amin.